Texas is known as the Lone Star State, and many Texans would love to see this nickname become an actual reality by seceding from the United States. Some are calling it a Texit. The notion of becoming an independent entity has been an ongoing issue in Texas ever since the American Civil War. In 1861, Texas declared its secession from the Union and sided with the Confederacy, even though this separation was never recognized by the powers that be in Washington. Texas has always prided itself on being a true representation of the United States. Hard-fought independence from Mexico, plenty of natural resources, healthy patriotism, and a state large in size and population. It's not uncommon for someone to introduce themselves with, "I'm from Texas," as opposed to, "I'm from the United States." And recently, the push for secession is becoming louder and louder, particularly amongst Texan Republicans. In 2013, more than 125,000 people signed a petition to the then-President Obama requesting that Texas be allowed to form its own government and withdraw from the U.S. This year in June, the Texan Republican Party called for a referendum in 2023 to decide if Texas should actually secede from the United States. While the number of Texans thought to be in support of secession is in the minority, Texan Republicans are firmly convinced that it can only be for the good of the state. Fact is, though, that the right for a state to secede is not in the American Constitution. That goes all the way back to the end of the American Civil War, when in 1869, the Supreme Court ruled it to be illegal. In the historical Texas versus White case, it was deemed that the United States was an indestructible union, and that no state had the right to secede. Flash forward to today, and many pro-secessionists see things a little differently. This most likely stems from Texas's time as a sovereign nation when it successfully battled for its independence from Mexican rule in 1836. Texas then functioned as an independent nation for the next 9 years, before joining the Union only to withdraw at the onset of the Civil War. The Texas nationalist movement claims that 500,000 Texans are behind the call to make Texas an independent nation again. Texas newspapers have conducted polls that suggest around 20% of Texans currently support secession, which is closer to 6 million people. Many Texan Republicans endorse this movement because they're confident that if enough people voice their support, then an exception could be made to allow Texas to secede. So the big questions to ask here are, why do some Texans want to secede? And what would happen if this was to actually happen? Firstly, it's no secret that there are plenty of Texans who are dissatisfied with the presidency of Joe Biden. Texas has long been one of America's biggest Republican states, and many see the Democrats' party's values and policies as vastly different from their own. These include, but are not limited to, such major issues relating to climate change, abortion, and appropriate subject to be taught, or not taught, in schools. The pro-secession Texans feel that self-government is the only way forward. For starters, it would mean being freed from federal tax laws such as estate taxes for the deceased, business franchise taxes, and care home taxes. Economically, the pro-secessionists are confident that Texas could get by. Texas is the second most populous state within nearly 30 million people inside, behind only California. Texas's GDP of approximately $2 trillion puts it ahead of Italy, Canada, and Russia. It has a rich abundance of natural resources and highly developed industries. These include agriculture, oil and gas, plus huge retail and service sectors. Texas also has the largest number of cattle in the United States and is the biggest producer of cotton. Its oil supplies account for roughly 1/3 of all American petroleum supplies. However, if Texas were to succeed, there'd be some serious consequences to deal with. Firstly, the federal government would shut down a large number of institutions and services that Texans are highly dependent on. Postal services, army bases, courthouses, prisons, and national parks would all cease to function. Government funding for education, roads, and infrastructure would also stop. Texas would then have to come up with its own healthcare system, a military, welfare, and social security system, not to mention a disaster relief fund. This would all likely run into trillions of dollars. That's just getting things started too, so... Despite this, of course, Texas already has a well-developed infrastructure with roads, airports, schools, and utilities all ready to go. There would still be some concerns relating to Texas's neighbors, both north and south of the border. Conflicts over access to water might be an issue with Oklahoma and New Mexico, while the sensitive issue of migration from Mexico could get things a little heated. It's also thought that secession by Texas would possibly encourage other southern states to follow suit. This southern region of the United States has largely conservative electorates that share similar political, social, and economic views to the Texan pro-secessionists. and a mutual dissatisfaction with the current American leadership. However, as much as some Texans may want to succeed, and as much as they're willing to believe that, hey, it can happen, it seems unlikely. Apart from the fact that it's illegal, it's hard to imagine America's federal government allowing it to go ahead. There's simply too much at stake. Not only would it lead to greater tensions on the Mexican border, but America would suddenly find itself with an antagonistic neighbor to the south. Then there's the wealth of natural resources and economic activity that America so desperately needs that come from the Lone Star State. The country's biggest Gulf of Mexico port is in Houston. Import traffic through Houston is 10 times that of the next busiest in New Orleans and in Alabama. America's aerospace industry is heavily reliant on Texas too. The state is the second biggest for manufacturing and exports, accounting for over $8 billion a year. Furthermore, Texas is proud of its support for the military. And the military likes Texas. The state has 15 bases, putting it just behind California. Finally, there's the matter of Texan natural resources, specifically oil, coal, beef, and cotton. Texas is an agricultural and raw materials giant, making it hard to see America okaying any secession and thereby giving up access to such lucrative industries. Oil and coal account for at least $56 billion in exports each year, while Texan beef makes up for 20% of American supplies. Texas exports huge numbers of beef and pork to Asian markets and is one of the world's top beef exporters, right up there with Australia. These factors mean that as much as many Texans are determined to secede, it's highly doubtful that the American government would, well, allow it. There would just be too much to lose. Yet, the situation isn't restricted to Texas. Other Republican or red states, such as Wyoming and New Hampshire, have also pushed to secede. In the United Kingdom, Scotland continues to make a case for exiting Britain, and Texan secessionists are not giving up. However, it could be that, the very resources and qualities that have made Texas great will ultimately prevent it from becoming truly independent.